The gallows-like platform loomed against the setting sun, casting long shadows across the dusty main street of Redemption, Colorado. Abigail Foster stood upon it, her wrists bound with rough rope, her dark hair tumbling from beneath a tattered bonnet as the auctioneer's voice boomed across the gathered crowd. It was 1873, and being a woman alone in the West was practically a death sentence or worse, as she was discovering now. Next up, gentlemen, a fine woman, barely 22, can cook clean and comes with no baggage. Starting bid is $10. Abigail kept her gaze fixed on the distant mountains, refusing to make eye contact with the leering men who called out increasingly higher bids. Her parents' wagon had been attacked by bandits 3 weeks ago, leaving her the sole survivor with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small locket containing a faded photograph of her family. The town marshal had found her wandering, half-starved, and brought her to Redemption. His solution to her predicament was this: an auction to find her a husband, or more accurately, a master. $40, shouted a grizzled miner with yellow teeth and hands permanently stained black from coal. 45, countered the local saloon owner, a man known for how poorly he treated the women who worked for him. Abigail's stomach tightened. She'd heard stories of women in her position, their lives amounting to little more than servitude, abuse, and despair. She closed her eyes, fighting back tears. $50, called another voice, followed by crude laughter and lewd suggestions that made her cheeks burn with shame. Going once, going twice. The auctioneer began, raising his hand dramatically. $300, came a calm, deep voice from the back of the crowd. A stunned silence fell over the gathering. Men turned to see who had made such an outlandish bid. The crowd parted, revealing a tall figure astride a magnificent black stallion. His face was partially obscured by the wide brim of his hat, but Abigail could make out a strong jaw covered with a few days' worth of stubble. The auctioneer blinked in surprise. $300. From you, Mr. Vaughn. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the dirt. He walked forward with an unhurried confidence, his long duster coat swaying with each step. As he approached the platform, Abigail got her first clear look at him, piercing blue eyes set in a sun-weathered face, broad shoulders, and a stance that spoke of someone accustomed to danger. "That's right," he said, reaching into his coat and pulling out a leather pouch. He counted out the money and handed it to the auctioneer. "And she's not for sale anymore." The auctioneer quickly counted the bills, then nodded. "Sold to Vincent Vaughn." The man Vincent looked up at Abigail, and for the first time since her parents' death, she saw something in someone's eyes that wasn't pity, lust, or indifference. It was respect. "Miss," Vincent said, tipping his hat slightly. "No one owns you, not anymore." Confusion swept over Abigail's face as the auctioneer untied her wrists. She rubbed at the raw skin while staring at the stranger, who had just spent a small fortune on her. "I don't understand," she whispered as she descended the steps of the platform, conscious of the disappointed murmurs from the crowd that was now dispersing. Vincent Vaughn offered his arm, which she hesitantly took. "Let's get you somewhere quiet where we can talk," he said, leading her toward a small cafe at the end of the street. His stallion followed without being led, clearly well-trained. Inside the cafe, they sat at a corner table. A matronly woman brought over 2 cups of coffee without being asked, nodding respectfully to Vincent. "Thank you, Martha," he said. When the woman left, Abigail found her voice again. "Mr. Vaughn, I appreciate what you did, but I have nothing to offer in return." "If you expect me to, I expect nothing," he interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. 3 weeks ago, my sister was in a position similar to yours in a town 2 days' ride from here. No one stepped in to help her. His eyes clouded briefly with pain. I was too late. Abigail's hand went involuntarily to her throat. I'm sorry. Don't be. It's not your burden to carry. Vincent took a sip of his coffee. I own a small ranch about 10 miles outside of town. There's a cabin on the property used to belong to the previous foreman before he moved on. It's yours if you want it. But why would you? Because it's the right thing to do. His eyes met hers, unwavering. You'll be safe there. You can stay as long as you need to get back on your feet. After that, what you do with your life is your choice. Abigail studied him carefully. In her short time in the West, she'd learned that men rarely did anything without expecting something in return. But there was a sincerity in Vincent Vaughn's eyes that made her want to trust him. I can work, she said finally. I'm not afraid of hard labor. I can cook, so tend a garden. A small smile touched Vincent's lips. I won't turn down help if it's freely given, but that's not why I'm offering you a place to stay. For the first time in weeks, Abigail felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this stranger truly was as honorable as he seemed. Then I accept your offer, Mr. Vaughn. And I thank you. Vincent, he corrected, or Vince if you prefer. Abigail, she replied. Abigail Foster. They finished their coffee in companionable silence. When they left the cafe, the sun had fully set, and stars were beginning to appear in the vast Colorado sky. Vincent helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. As they rode out of Redemption, Abigail could feel the warmth of his chest against her back, solid and reassuring. She didn't know what awaited her at Vincent Vaughn's ranch, but for the first time since losing her family, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. The ranch appeared as they crested a small hill, a modest main house, a large barn, several corrals, and a smaller cabin set a respectful distance from the main dwelling. A stream wound its way through the property, catching the moonlight like a silver ribbon. It's beautiful, Abigail whispered. It's home, Vincent replied simply. 2 ranch hands emerged from the barn as they approached, both eyeing Abigail with curiosity. Boys, this is Miss Abigail Foster, Vincent announced as he dismounted, then helped her down. She'll be staying in the old foreman's cabin. Madam, they both said, tipping their hats. Miss Foster, this is Hank and Joe. They help me run this place. Abigail nodded politely to the men, noticing they seemed neither surprised nor judgmental about her arrival. Whatever kind of man Vincent Vaughn was, his employees respected his decisions. Vincent led her to the small cabin, carrying a lantern to light their way. The interior was simple but clean: a bed with a quilt, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, and a basin for washing. A bookshelf held a surprising number of volumes. It's not much, Vincent said, lighting a lamp on the table. It's perfect, Abigail replied honestly. After weeks of uncertainty and fear, the humble cabin seemed like a palace. Vincent nodded, looking somewhat relieved. There's food in the cupboard, and the pump outside brings up clean water. If you need anything, the main house is just up the path. He turned to leave but paused at the door. Lock this behind me. You're safe here, but I expect you'll sleep better knowing the door is secured. Thank you, she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Not just for this, but for what you did in town. I don't know what would have happened if, but it didn't happen, he interrupted gently. Get some rest, Miss Foster. Tomorrow's a new day. After he left, Abigail secured the door as suggested. She explored the cabin, running her fingers over the spines of the books, finding simple toiletries by the washing basin, and discovering a drawer containing a nightgown and some basic clothing that must have belonged to a previous occupant. As she lay in bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the countryside, Abigail marveled at how quickly life could change. Yesterday, she had been facing a future of servitude or worse. Tonight, she was free, with a roof over her head and a chance to rebuild her life. She fell asleep wondering about the man who had made it all possible, the cowboy with sad eyes who had stepped forward when no one else would and said, "Not anymore." Morning came with golden light streaming through the cabin's single window. Abigail woke to the sounds of the ranch already bustling with activity, horses nickering, men calling to each other, the distant lowing of cattle. For a moment, she lay still, savoring the feeling of safety that had been so elusive these past weeks. She dressed in a simple skirt and blouse she found in the drawer, grateful that they fit well enough. After washing her face in the basin, she stepped outside to find Vincent chopping wood near the main house. He paused when he saw her, resting his axe against the chopping block. "Good morning," he called. "Sleep well." "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted, approaching him. "I was hoping I might help with breakfast. It's the least I can do." Vincent considered this, then nodded. "Mrs. Hernandez might appreciate the help. She comes in from town 3 times a week to cook and clean." He led her to the main house, a sturdy 2-story structure built of local timber. Inside, it was simply but comfortably furnished, with a large stone fireplace dominating the living area. From the kitchen came the appetizing smells of coffee and frying bacon. Mrs. Hernandez, a plump woman with graying hair and kind eyes, looked up as they entered. "Ah, this must be the young lady Hank mentioned," she said with a warm smile. "Welcome, child." "Thank you," Abigail replied. "I'd like to help if I may." "Another pair of hands is always welcome," Mrs. Hernandez said, gesturing to a bowl of eggs. "You can start by scrambling those." Vincent left them to their work, and soon Abigail found herself enjoying the simple task of preparing breakfast. Mrs. Hernandez was chatty but not intrusive, filling the silence with stories about the town and gentle inquiries about Abigail's cooking experience. When the men came in for breakfast, Vincent, Hank, Joe, and 2 others Abigail hadn't met, yet they sat at the large table while she and Mrs. Hernandez served the food. "Miss Foster," Vincent said as she set a plate before him, "you don't have to serve us. You're a guest here, not hired help." "I want to be useful," she replied firmly. "Please let me do this." He held her gaze for a moment, then nodded, seeming to understand her need to contribute, to have purpose. After breakfast, Mrs. Hernandez took Abigail aside. "Mr. Vaughn explained your situation," she said quietly. "He's a good man, that one. Lost his wife and child to fever 5 years ago. Then his sister last month. He keeps to himself mostly, but he's got a kind heart." The information gave Abigail a new perspective on her rescuer. His pain ran deeper than she had realized. Over the next few days, Abigail fell into a routine. She helped Mrs. Hernandez when she was there, and took over many of the cooking and cleaning duties when she wasn't. She tended a small vegetable garden behind her cabin, and even learned to collect eggs from the chickens without getting pecked too badly. Vincent respected her space, never coming to the cabin uninvited, but he often found reasons to check on her, bringing firewood, offering books from his personal library, or simply passing by to ask if she needed anything from town. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Abigail was sitting on the small porch of her cabin, watching the sunset when Vincent approached, leading his horse. "I'm riding out to check the north pasture," he said. "Would you like to come? It's a beautiful view from up there." Surprised but pleased by the invitation, Abigail nodded. "I'd like that very much." He helped her mount, then swung up behind her as he had that first night. As they rode across the property, he pointed out landmarks and shared stories about how he had come to own the ranch. "I was passing through these parts after the war," he explained. "The previous owner was getting on in years, no children to leave it to. I worked for him for 2 seasons, then he offered to sell it to me for a fair price. Said I reminded him of himself as a young man. You fought in the war?" Abigail asked, curious about this man who had become her protector. "Union cavalry," he confirmed. "Not something I care to dwell on. Saw too many good men die on both sides." They reached a high point overlooking the ranch and the surrounding countryside. Vincent dismounted and helped her down, then stood beside her as they gazed at the panoramic view. "It's breathtaking," Abigail said softly, taking in the mountains in the distance, the patchwork of pastures and the ribbon of river winding through it all. "This is where I come when I need to remember why I stay," Vincent admitted. "Why I keep going when it would be easier not to." The vulnerability in his voice touched her. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand on his arm. "Thank you for sharing it with me." He looked down at her hand, then into her eyes. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition, a possibility. But Vincent simply nodded and turned back to the view. As they rode back to the ranch in the gathering dusk, Abigail found herself increasingly aware of the man behind her, the strength in his arms as he held the reins, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the faint scent of leather and pine that seemed to cling to him. When they reached her cabin, he helped her dismount, his hands lingering briefly at her waist. "Thank you for the ride," she said, suddenly shy. "My pleasure, Miss Foster." "Abigail," she corrected. "Please call me Abigail." A small smile touched his lips. "Abigail, then. Good night." She watched him ride toward the main house, an unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest. It was only as she prepared for bed that she recognized the feeling for what it was, the first stirrings of something more than gratitude toward Vincent Vaughn. The next morning, Abigail woke with a sense of purpose. She had been at the ranch for 2 weeks now, living on Vincent's charity. It was time she found a way to truly contribute. After preparing breakfast for the ranch hands, she approached Vincent as he was heading out to the corral. "I'd like to discuss something with you," she said, falling into step beside him. He slowed his pace to match hers. "I'm listening." "I appreciate everything you've done for me, but I can't continue to live here without proper employment. I'd like to work for my keep officially." Vincent stopped walking and turned to face her. "You've already been helping more than necessary." "It's not the same," she insisted. "I need to know I've earned my place here." He studied her for a long moment, seeming to understand her need for independence. "What do you propose?" "I could take over the cooking and household management permanently. Mrs. Hernandez mentioned she's been wanting to reduce her hours to spend more time with her grandchildren." Vincent considered this. "Would that be enough for you, to feel you've earned your place?" "For now," Abigail replied honestly. "Until I determine what I want to do long term," he nodded slowly. "All right, we'll pay you a fair wage, same as we would anyone else in the position, but you continue to stay in the cabin rent-free. That's non-negotiable." Abigail smiled, relieved. "Thank you. I'll start immediately." True to her word, Abigail threw herself into her new role with enthusiasm. She reorganized the pantry, planned meals that made the most of available ingredients, and even convinced Vincent to let her order some supplies from town that would allow her to bake bread and pies. Mrs. Hernandez, rather than being offended, was delighted to have more time with her family while knowing the ranch household was in capable hands. She visited occasionally, bringing Abigail recipes and advice. As summer progressed into early fall, life on the ranch fell into a pleasant rhythm. Abigail rose early each morning to prepare breakfast, spent her days managing the household, and often sat on her porch in the evenings, reading books borrowed from Vincent's extensive library. Vincent, for his part, seemed to be emerging slowly from the shell of grief Mrs. Hernandez had described. He began to join Abigail for evening meals occasionally, and their conversations grew longer and more personal. She learned about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his time in the cavalry during the war, and his dreams for the ranch. In turn, she shared stories of her life in Boston, her parents' decision to seek a new beginning in the West, and the tragic journey that had led her to redemption. One Sunday afternoon, in September, Vincent appeared at her cabin door holding the reins of 2 saddled horses. "Church service just let out in town," he said. "Thought you might like to attend the social afterward. Folks bring food, there's music. Mighty you good to meet some people besides us dusty cowboys." Abigail hesitated. She hadn't been to town since the day of the auction and wasn't sure how she would be received. Seeing her uncertainty, Vincent added, "You'd be going as my guest. No one would dare make you uncomfortable." Something in the protective tone of his voice gave her courage. "Give me a few minutes to change," she said. She put on her best dress, one Mrs. Hernandez had helped her alter from clothing left by Vincent's sister, and pinned up her hair neatly. When she emerged from the cabin, Vincent's expression made her momentarily self-conscious. "You look lovely," he said simply, helping her mount the gentle mare he had brought for her. The ride to town was pleasant, with Vincent pointing out changes in the landscape as summer gave way to fall. When they reached Redemption, Abigail was relieved to find the atmosphere of the social welcoming. Tables had been set up in the town square, laden with food, and a small group of musicians played lively tunes. Vincent introduced her to several people: the preacher and his wife, the town doctor, shopkeepers, and ranching families from neighboring properties. Most were polite, though Abigail noticed a few women eyeing her with curiosity or suspicion. "Don't mind them," Vincent murmured when they had a moment alone. "They're just wondering about us." "About us?" Abigail asked, feeling her cheeks warm. A single man and woman living on the same property, even with separate dwellings, it's bound to raise eyebrows. Before she could respond, they were approached by a well-dressed man with a carefully trimmed beard. "Vaughn," he greeted, extending his hand. "Good to see you in town for once." "Hammond," Vincent replied, shaking the man's hand with what Abigail perceived as reluctance. "Miss Foster, this is George Hammond. He owns the bank and several businesses in town." "Charmed," Hammond said, taking Abigail's hand and holding it a moment longer than necessary. "I believe we almost met at an event a while back." Abigail stiffened, recognizing him now as one of the men who had been in the crowd during the auction. Though he hadn't bid, Vincent's jaw tightened. "Miss Foster is employed at my ranch as housekeeper and cook. Is that what they're calling it these days?" Hammond asked with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Vincent took a step forward, but Abigail placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Mr. Hammond," she said coolly, "I find your implication insulting to both myself and Mr. Vaughn, who has been nothing but a gentleman and a fair employer." Hammond looked taken aback by her direct response. "No offense meant, of course," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Enjoy the social." He tipped his hat and moved away. "I apologize for him," Vincent said, his voice tight with anger. "You have nothing to apologize for," Abigail assured him. "Men like that exist everywhere, not just in the West." They rejoined the festivities, and Abigail was determined not to let Hammond's insinuations ruin the day. She sampled dishes from the food tables, conversed with the friendlier townspeople, and even allowed Vincent to lead her in a dance when the music slowed. As they moved together, his hand respectfully at her waist, Abigail was acutely aware of the contrast between this experience and her last time in town. Then, she had been an object to be sold. Now, She was a woman enjoying a social gathering with a man who treated her with dignity. "Thank you for bringing me today," she said as they danced. "Despite Mr. Hammond, it's been wonderful." Vincent's eyes softened as they met hers. "You deserve to have wonderful days, Abigail." The way he said her name sent a pleasant shiver through her. For a moment, as they swayed to the music under the autumn sky, Abigail allowed herself to imagine what it might be like if there were something more between them than employer and employee, rescuer and rescued. The spell was broken when the music ended, and Vincent reluctantly stepped back. But something had shifted between them, a boundary crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. As they rode home in the golden light of late afternoon, Abigail felt a new sense of possibility blossoming within her, and a new anxiety as well. She had come to care deeply for Vincent Vaughn, but she had no idea if he could ever see her as more than someone he had rescued, someone in need of his protection. What she didn't know was that Vincent was having similar thoughts as he rode beside her, stealing glances at her profile against the backdrop of mountains and sky. He had brought her to his ranch out of a sense of duty and compassion, never expecting to find himself drawn to her strength, her grace under pressure, and her quiet determination to rebuild her life. Neither spoke of these thoughts as they returned to the ranch, but the silence between them was filled with unasked questions and unexpressed hopes. The weeks following the town social brought subtle changes to Abigail and Vincent's interactions. Their conversations lingered longer, their gazes held more meaning, and they found more reasons to be in each other's company. Vincent began taking his evening meals at the main house more regularly, and afterward they would often sit by the fire, reading or talking until the hour grew late. On one such evening in early October, as the first real chill of autumn settled over the ranch, Vincent set aside his book and looked thoughtfully at Abigail. "Winter comes early in these mountains," he said. "First snow could be just weeks away." Abigail nodded, wondering why he seemed suddenly serious. "I've been making preparations, preserving vegetables from the garden, mending blankets, the cabin." He began, then paused, choosing his words carefully. "It wasn't built with harsh winters in mind. The stove is adequate for cooking, but it struggles to heat the space when temperatures drop below freezing." "I'm sure I'll manage," Abigail replied, though the concern in his voice gave her pause. Vincent leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. "There's plenty of room here in the main house. The second bedroom hasn't been used since my sister visited, but it's comfortable. You would be warmer, safer." Abigail's heart quickened at the suggestion. Moving into the main house would change things between them in ways neither might be ready for. "People would talk," she said softly. "People already talk," he countered with a wry smile. Hammond saw to that. She looked down at her hands, considering. "If I were to move into the main house, what would that mean? For us?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with implications. Vincent rose from his chair and moved to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "It would mean whatever we want it to mean," he said, his voice low and earnest. "Abigail, I brought you here offering sanctuary, expecting nothing in return. That hasn't changed. But I would be lying if I said my feelings for you haven't. Evolved," her breath caught. "Evolved how? I find myself thinking about you when we're apart. I look forward to our evenings together more than any other part of my day." He paused, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "I care for you deeply, but I would never presume I care for you too," she interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than I thought possible after everything that happened." Relief and something like joy flickered across Vincent's face. He raised one hand to gently touch her cheek. "Then perhaps we should give ourselves time to explore these feelings without the pressures of propriety or others' expectations." Abigail leaned slightly into his touch. "And my moving to the main house, a practical solution to the coming winter," he said with a small smile. "Nothing more need be assumed by either of us or anyone else." She nodded slowly. "Then I accept your offer both of the room and of time." Vincent's smile broadened. He leaned forward hesitantly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but Abigail met him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. When they parted, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected to find you," he whispered. "Nor I you," she replied, her heart full to bursting with emotions she had thought lost to her forever. The next day they moved Abigail's belongings to the main house. It wasn't much, some clothing, a few personal items she had acquired since coming to the ranch, and the books Vincent had lent her. The room was indeed comfortable, with a large bed, a dresser, and windows that looked out over the mountains. "My sister decorated it," Vincent explained as Abigail ran her hand over the patchwork quilt on the bed. "Said my taste was too austere." Abigail smiled, imagining the woman she'd never met trying to soften her brother's practical nature. She had a good eye. That night, Abigail slept in the main house for the first time. Though only a hallway separated her room from Vincent's, they maintained the respectful distance they had agreed upon. They were giving themselves time, allowing whatever was growing between them to unfold naturally. Life on the ranch continued, but with a new undercurrent of possibility that made even mundane tasks seem imbued with significance. They worked side by side, preparing the ranch for winter, storing firewood, checking fences, bringing the herd down from the high pastures. One evening in late October, they were returning from checking on a pregnant mare in the barn when the first snowflakes began to fall. "Right on time," Vincent said, looking up at the darkening sky. "Come on, let's get inside before it gets heavy." They hurried to the house, and by the time they had shed their coats, the snow was falling steadily. Vincent built up the fire while Abigail prepared a pot of coffee. "It's beautiful," she said, standing by the window with her coffee cup, watching the snow transform the landscape. Vincent came to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "It can be dangerous, too. Storms blow up quickly in these mountains." "Is that why you were worried about me staying in the cabin?" He nodded. "I've seen men get lost between buildings in a blizzard, just yards from safety." Abigail turned to look at him, struck again by how his concern for her well-being had never wavered since the day they met. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For caring what happens to me. For seeing me as someone worth saving that day in town." Vincent's expression grew serious. "You were always worth saving, Abigail. I just happened to be the one who recognized it." She set down her coffee cup and stepped closer to him, emboldened by the warmth in his eyes. Rising on her toes, she pressed her lips to his in a kiss that conveyed all the gratitude, affection, and growing love she felt for this man who had changed her life. Vincent responded with equal fervor, his arms encircling her waist to draw her closer. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, he brushed a strand of hair from her face with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I'm falling in love with you," he confessed quietly. "I don't expect you to say it back. I just needed you to know." But Abigail did want to say it back. The realization had been building for weeks, perhaps since that first ride to the overlook when he had shared his private sanctuary with her. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered, watching joy illuminate his features. They stood there by the window, the snow falling outside, the fire crackling behind them. Two people who had found each other against all odds in the vastness of the frontier. Later that evening, as they sat together on the sofa, Abigail resting against Vincent's chest while he read aloud from a book of poetry, She felt a sense of peace she had thought lost forever after her parents' deaths. Here, in this house, with this man, she had found not just safety but the possibility of happiness. The snowstorm lasted 3 days, blanketing the ranch in white and keeping everyone close to home. For Abigail and Vincent, it was a gift time together without interruption, learning the rhythms of shared domestic life, growing more comfortable with expressions of affection. On the morning of the 4th day, the sun emerged, casting diamond-like sparkles across the pristine snow. Vincent had business in town, supplies to order, mail to collect, and asked if Abigail would like to accompany him. "I'd like that," she said over breakfast. "I need some fabric and thread if I'm going to mend those shirts you keep tearing." He smiled, reaching across the table to take her hand. "You don't have to do that, you know. You're not just the housekeeper anymore." "I know," she replied, squeezing his hand, "but I want to take care of you just as you've taken care of me." The ride to town was magical, with the winter landscape stretching out around them in unspoiled beauty. Abigail rode her own horse now, having learned to ride properly under Vincent's patient instruction. In redemption, they went about their errands together, ignoring the curious glances from townspeople who had clearly heard about their changed living arrangements. Vincent was unfailingly polite but protective, his hand often at the small of her back as they moved from store to store. They were leaving the general store, arms laden with packages, when they encountered George Hammond. "Vaughn," he greeted, his eyes moving to Abigail with undisguised interest. "Miss Foster, I see you're still employed at the ranch." Vincent's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Abigail stepped forward. "Mr. Hammond, your continued insinuations are unwelcome. My relationship with Mr. Vaughn is none of your concern." Hammond's eyebrows rose at her directness. "Forgive me," he said, not sounding particularly contrite. "I merely find it interesting how quickly your circumstances have improved since your arrival in our town." "My circumstances improved because of the kindness and decency of one man when the rest of this town was content to auction me off like cattle," Abigail replied, her voice steady despite her rising anger. Hammond's face darkened. "You should be careful, Miss Foster." "A woman in your position is under my protection," Vincent interrupted, his voice dangerously low. "Choose your next words very carefully, Hammond." A tense silence fell between the men. Finally, Hammond forced a tight smile. "No offense intended, of course. Good day to you both." He tipped his hat and walked away, his posture stiff with wounded pride. "I don't trust that man," Vincent muttered as they continued to their horses. "Nor I," Abigail agreed, "but he's not worth our concern, not today." Vincent's expression softened as he helped her mount. "You're right. Let's not let him spoil our day." They completed their errands and had a pleasant meal at the cafe before heading back to the ranch. As they rode, Abigail reflected on how differently she felt entering redemption now compared to her first terrifying experience. With Vincent beside her, she felt strong, protected, and most importantly, valued for who she was rather than what service she could provide. That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Vincent seemed preoccupied, repeatedly reaching into his pocket as if checking for something. "Is everything all right?" Abigail asked finally. He looked up, seeming almost startled. "Yes, of course, I just—" He took a deep breath, then rose from his chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "Abigail, I had planned a more romantic moment for this, but I find I can't wait another minute." Her heart began to race as he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I know we've only known each other a few months," he continued, his voice husky with emotion. "But I feel as though I've been waiting for you my entire life. You've brought light back into my world when I thought it would remain in shadow forever." He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "I love you, Abigail Foster. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Abigail's eyes as joy surged through her. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Vincent, I would be honored to be your wife." His face broke into a radiant smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he was pulling her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that spoke of all the love and promise of their future together. When they finally parted, both breathless, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I bought the ring in town today," he admitted. "I've been wanting to ask you for weeks, but I wanted to do it properly." Abigail laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "This was perfect," she assured him, looking down at the ring that now symbolized their commitment to each other. "Absolutely perfect." The news of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch, and then to town. Most reactions were positive, the ranch hands offering hearty congratulations, Mrs. Hernandez tearfully embracing them both, the preacher agreeing to perform the ceremony after Christmas. But not everyone was pleased. George Hammond, in particular, seemed to take their upcoming marriage as a personal affront. He began making veiled comments around town about Vincent's charitable impulses and Abigail's fortunate rescue from the auction block. "Just ignore him," Vincent advised when Abigail mentioned hearing about the gossip. "People like Hammond can't understand relationships built on mutual respect and love. They see everything as a transaction." Abigail tried to follow his advice, focusing instead on preparations for their wedding and the coming holidays. December arrived with more snow and a festive atmosphere at the ranch. They decorated the main house with pine boughs and red ribbons, and Vincent surprised Abigail by bringing home a small evergreen tree to adorn with homemade ornaments. One evening, as they sat together looking at the decorated tree, Vincent cleared his throat nervously. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," he said. Abigail turned to him, curious about his sudden seriousness. "What is it?" "After we're married, I was thinking. That is, if you agree, I'd like us to try to have a family." His voice faltered slightly. "After losing my son, I never thought I'd want to be a father again. The risk of that pain seemed too great. But with you, Abigail, I find myself wanting everything: a full life, children, growing old together." Tears pricked at Abigail's eyes. "I want that too," she whispered, taking his hand. "So much." Relief and joy washed over Vincent's face. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness again," he murmured against her hair. "You've given me back my future, Abigail." "And you've given me mine," she replied, her heart full to bursting with love for this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. Their wedding day arrived on a crisp, clear morning in late December. The small church in Redemption was decorated with winter greenery and candles, and filled with well-wishers, ranch hands, townspeople who had come to know and respect Abigail, and a few of Vincent's friends from neighboring ranches. Abigail wore a simple but elegant white dress that Mrs. Hernandez had helped her make, with a crown of holly berries in her dark hair. As she walked down the aisle toward Vincent, who stood tall and handsome in his best suit, she felt a profound sense of rightness, as if every tragedy and hardship in her life had been leading her to this moment, to this man. The preacher spoke of love, commitment, and building a life together. When it came time for their vows, Vincent took Abigail's hands in his blue eyes intense with emotion. "Abigail, when I first saw you standing on that auction platform, something in me recognized something in you: a strength, a dignity that no circumstance could diminish. I knew then that I had to help you, but I never imagined how profoundly you would help me in return. You've healed parts of me I thought would stay broken forever." His voice caught. "I promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you for all the days of my life." Tears slipped down Abigail's cheeks as she began her own vows. "Vincent, you saved me when I had lost all hope. You offered me safety without demands, kindness without conditions, and eventually, a love I never thought I'd find. You saw value in me when I felt worthless and strength in me when I felt broken." She squeezed his hands. "I promise to love you, support you, and stand by your side through whatever life brings, for as long as we both shall live." The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and when Vincent kissed her, Abigail felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. The cheers and applause of the congregation seemed distant compared to the look of absolute adoration in her new husband's eyes. The celebration afterward was joyful, a feast at the ranch for all their guests, with music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Even as she moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, Abigail found her gaze repeatedly drawn to Vincent, still hardly able to believe that this good, honorable man was now her husband. When the last guest had departed and they were finally alone, Vincent took her in his arms, his expression tender. "Happy Mrs. Vaughn?" he asked softly. The new name sent a thrill through her. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied, reaching up to touch his face. "And you?" "I never knew happiness could feel like this," he admitted, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. "Like every moment is a gift." That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other anew, their love expressed in whispered words and gentle touches that gradually grew more passionate. Abigail had been nervous about this aspect of marriage, given her limited knowledge, but Vincent was patient and considerate, guiding her with tender care until they both found release in each other's arms. Afterward, lying in the circle of his embrace, Abigail felt a profound sense of peace and belonging. This was home, not just the ranch or the house, but here with Vincent, wherever life might take them. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. His arms tightened around her. "And I love you, more than I have words to express." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's warmth, the first night of a lifetime they would build together. Spring came early to the Colorado mountains that year, as if nature itself was celebrating the new beginning at the Vaughn Ranch. The snowmelt revealed tender green shoots, and soon the pastures were carpeted with wildflowers. Cattle grazed contentedly, new calves frolicked on unsteady legs, and the garden Abigail had expanded thrived under her care. Life as Mrs. Vaughn suited Abigail perfectly. She managed the household with quiet efficiency, worked alongside her husband when extra hands were needed for ranch tasks, and found time to pursue interests that had been impossible during her struggle for survival: reading, sketching the beautiful landscape, and learning to play the small piano Vincent had surprised her with as a wedding gift. Their evenings were perhaps the most precious, sharing meals, discussing the day's events, reading together by the fire, and retiring to their bedroom where they continued to discover new depths to their physical connection. One morning, in late April, Abigail woke feeling unusually queasy. She slipped quietly from bed, trying not to disturb Vincent, but he stirred anyway, reaching for her. "Abigail, what's wrong?" "Nothing," she assured him, though she pressed a hand to her stomach. "Just feeling a little unwell. It will pass." But it didn't pass. For the next several mornings, Abigail woke with the same nausea, sometimes having to rush outside to be sick. Vincent grew increasingly concerned, finally insisting she see the doctor during their next trip to town. Dr. Morgan examined her thoroughly, asking questions about her symptoms, then sat back with a knowing smile. "Mrs. Vaughn, I believe congratulations are in order. You're expecting a child, probably due in late autumn." Abigail's hand flew to her stomach, a mixture of joy and disbelief washing over her. "A baby? Are you certain?" "As certain as medical science allows," the doctor confirmed. "All your symptoms point to it, and by my calculations, you're about 8 weeks along." Vincent, who had been waiting anxiously outside, looked up sharply when Abigail emerged from the doctor's office, her face radiant despite her paleness. "What did he say?" "Are you all right?" he asked, taking her hands. Abigail's eyes filled with happy tears. "I'm more than all right, Vincent. We're going to have a baby." For a moment, he stood perfectly still, an array of emotions crossing his face: surprise, joy, and a flicker of something like fear that Abigail understood completely. After losing his first child, the prospect of fatherhood again would naturally bring both happiness and anxiety. Then he was pulling her into his arms, holding her with exquisite gentleness, as if she had suddenly become fragile. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." The ride home was quiet, both of them absorbed in thoughts of the future. As they approached the ranch, Vincent finally spoke. "I'm going to worry," he admitted. "Probably more than I should, after what happened with Emily and our son." Abigail reached across to touch his arm. "I know. And I won't tell you not to worry, because I understand. But Vincent, this is a new beginning for both of us. We can't let fear of what might happen rob us of the joy of what is happening." He looked at her with such love that it took her breath away. "How did I get so fortunate to find someone as wise as you are beautiful?" "I ask myself the same question about you every day," she replied softly. They told no one about the baby at first, wanting to keep the precious secret between them for a while. Vincent became even more protective, insisting Abigail rest more and avoid certain ranch tasks. She complied with some of his requests, but gently pushed back on others, determined to maintain her independence and usual activities as long as it was safe to do so. By June, her condition was becoming noticeable, and they shared the news with the ranch hands and friends in town. The reaction was overwhelmingly positive, with Mrs. Hernandez immediately beginning to knit baby clothes and the hands offering to build a cradle. Only George Hammond's reaction struck a sour note. When he overheard the news while Abigail and Vincent were at the general store, he approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "So, the family expands," he commented, his gaze lingering unpleasantly on Abigail's slightly rounded abdomen. "How convenient for you, Miss Foster, or Mrs. Vaughn, I should say." Vincent stepped forward, his expression dangerous. "You have something to say, Hammond, say it plainly." The banker held up his hands in a placating gesture, merely offering congratulations. A child is always a blessing. But his tone suggested otherwise. After Hammond walked away, Abigail placed a calming hand on Vincent's arm. "He's trying to provoke you. Don't let him." Vincent's jaw worked as he struggled to control his anger. "The way he looks at you, the things he implies." "One day, I swear, he's not worth your concern," Abigail interrupted gently. "We know the truth of our life together. That's all that matters." But as summer progressed into autumn and Abigail's pregnancy became more advanced, Hammond's veiled comments and suggestive looks, whenever they encountered him in town, began to wear on both of them. It was clear he harbored some resentment or obsession regarding Abigail, though his exact motives remained unclear. One evening, in early September, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Vincent broached a subject that had clearly been on his mind. "Have you thought about names for the baby?" he asked, his hand resting gently on her now prominent belly. Abigail smiled, covering his hand with her own. "I have. If it's a boy, I was thinking we might name him after your father, James, wasn't it?" Vincent nodded, visibly moved by the suggestion. "And if it's a girl, I was hoping we might name her Rose after my mother." James or Rose Vaughn, Vincent said thoughtfully, testing the names. Both sound just right to me. They sat in companionable silence for a while, enjoying the peaceful evening. Then Vincent spoke again, his tone more serious. "I've been thinking, maybe we should consider moving." Abigail turned to him in surprise. "Moving? But you love this ranch, it's your home." "You and the baby are my home now," he said simply. "And I can't help feeling that as long as we're near redemption, Hammond will find ways to make trouble for us. We can't let one spiteful man drive us from a place we love," Abigail protested. "Besides, where would we go?" Vincent sighed, taking her hand. "I don't know. Further west, perhaps. California, even. I just want you and our child to be safe and happy, free from Hammond's malice." "We are safe and happy here," Abigail assured him, squeezing his hand. "Hammond is just one bitter man among many good people who have accepted us. This is where our child should grow up, on the land their father worked to build into something beautiful." Vincent studied her face, seeing the determination there. "All right," he conceded, "but promise me you'll be careful around Hammond. There's something not right about that man." "I promise," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "But I suspect he's all talk. Men like that usually are." Neither of them could have predicted how wrong that assessment would prove to be. The baby arrived on a stormy night in late October, 2 weeks earlier than Dr. Morgan had predicted. Vincent had ridden through the driving rain to fetch the doctor when Abigail's pains began, returning just in time to hear his child's first cry. Rose Vaughn entered the world pink and perfect, with a tuft of dark hair like her mother's and blue eyes that the doctor said might eventually turn to her father's color. When the nurse placed her in Vincent's arms for the first time, he looked down at his daughter with such tender wonder that Abigail's heart seemed to expand in her chest. "Hello, little Rose," he whispered, a tear slipping down his weathered cheek. "I've been waiting for you." The first weeks of Rose's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights, feeding sessions, and moments of such profound joy that Abigail sometimes wondered if she was dreaming. Vincent proved to be a devoted father, as willing to change diapers and walk the floor with a fussy baby as he was to handle the toughest ranch chores. As winter settled over the mountains again, their little family established new routines centered around Rose's needs. The ranch hands doted on the baby, bringing small gifts and volunteering to help with extra tasks, so Vincent could spend more time with his family. On Christmas Eve, as they sat by the fire with Rose sleeping peacefully in her cradle nearby, Vincent presented Abigail with a small package wrapped in silver paper. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "We agreed not to exchange gifts this year with all the expenses for the baby." "This is special," he insisted. "Open it." Inside the package was a locket similar to the one Abigail had been wearing when they first met, the one containing the photograph of her parents, which had been lost during her ordeal before arriving in redemption. "Oh, Vincent," she breathed, opening the locket to find miniature portraits of him and Rose inside. "It's perfect." "I know it can't replace the one you lost," he said, helping her fasten it around her neck. "But I thought you might like to carry your new family close to your heart, just as you once carried your parents." Abigail was too moved to speak. She simply threw her arms around him, hoping he could feel all the love she couldn't express in words. Later that night, after they had placed gifts around the tree for Rose's first Christmas, Vincent pulled Abigail into his arms, his expression serious. "This past year has given me more happiness than I ever thought possible," he said quietly. "You, Rose, our life together, it's more than I deserve." "It's exactly what you deserve," Abigail corrected him, reaching up to touch his face. "What we both deserve after everything we've been through." He turned his head to kiss her palm, a gesture that had become familiar and beloved. "I want you to know, whatever happens, that meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me. Loving you and Rose is the greatest privilege of my life." Something in his tone made Abigail uneasy. "Why does that sound like goodbye?" Vincent shook his head, pulling her closer. "Not goodbye. Never that, just a reminder of what matters most. Sometimes I worry that I don't tell you often enough." She relaxed against him, dismissing her momentary concern. "You tell me in 1,000 ways every day, Vincent Vaughn, and I love you for it." They went to bed that night wrapped in each other's arms, content in their love and the beautiful life they had built together against all odds. Neither could have known that forces were gathering that would soon threaten everything they held dear. The new year brought heavy snows that isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. Abigail didn't mind the seclusion. She had everything she needed in their warm home with Vincent and Rose. The baby was thriving, growing more alert and responsive each day, rewarding her parents with smiles that melted their hearts. When the weather finally cleared enough for travel in late February, Vincent announced he needed to go to town for supplies and to check on some business at the bank. Abigail, eager for a change of scenery after the long confinement, asked to accompany him with Rose. "Are you sure?" Vincent asked, concerned. "It's still quite cold for the baby to be out." "We'll bundle her up warmly," Abigail assured him. "Besides, I need to pick up some fabric for new curtains, and Mrs. Hernandez has been asking to see Rose." Vincent relented, and they set out the next morning in the sleigh, Rose securely nestled between them under layers of blankets. The journey to town was pleasant, with the winter landscape sparkling around them and their daughter's occasional coos providing sweet accompaniment. In redemption, they split up to complete their errands more efficiently, Vincent heading to the bank and feed store, while Abigail took Rose to visit Mrs. Hernandez, who was ecstatic to see how much the baby had grown. Afterward, Abigail stopped at the general store for her fabric and other household supplies. She was just leaving the store, Rose bundled in her arms, when George Hammond stepped into her path. "Mrs. Vaughn," he greeted, his smile not reaching his eyes as usual. "And the little one, how domestic you look, Mr. Hammond," Abigail acknowledged coolly, trying to step around him. He moved to block her way again. "I understand congratulations are in order. Your husband has just completed the purchase of the Jenkins property adjoining your ranch. Quite an expansion." Abigail was surprised Vincent hadn't mentioned any land purchase to her. "Excuse me, Mr. Hammond, but I need to find my husband." "Of course," Hammond said, finally stepping aside. But as she passed, he added in a low voice, "One wonders what a man like Vaughn sees in a woman who was once on the auction block. But then, men have always been susceptible to certain charms." Abigail froze, anger flaring within her. She turned to face him, holding Rose protectively closer. "Mr. Hammond, your persistent unpleasantness toward me is both puzzling and tiresome. If you have something to say it plainly. Otherwise, I suggest you keep your insinuations to yourself." Hammond's face darkened. "You think you're better than me now, don't you? With your rancher husband and your perfect little family. But I know what you are." "And what is that, exactly?" Abigail challenged, refusing to be intimidated despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. He leaned closer, his voice a venomous whisper. "A woman who sells herself to the highest bidder." Before Abigail could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Step away from my wife, Hammond." Vincent stood a few yards away, his expression thunderous, hands clenched at his sides. Hammond straightened, a false smile spreading across his face. "Vaughn, your wife and I were just having a friendly conversation." "There's nothing friendly about the way you speak to or about my wife," Vincent said, closing the distance between them with purposeful strides. "I've warned you before." Hammond's smile vanished, replaced by a look of contempt. "You've made your point quite clear, Vaughn. I was merely offering congratulations on your land purchase." "Your congratulations aren't needed or wanted," Vincent replied coldly. He turned to Abigail, his expression softening immediately. "Are you and Rose all right?" "We're fine," she assured him, though her heart was still racing from the confrontation. "Just ready to go home." Vincent placed a protective arm around her shoulders, guiding her toward the sleigh. "Let's go, then." As they walked away, Hammond called after them, "Enjoy your perfect life while it lasts, Vaughn. Nothing stays perfect forever." Vincent tensed but kept walking, not giving Hammond the satisfaction of a response. Once they were in the sleigh and heading out of town, Abigail turned to her husband. "What did he mean about the Jenkins property? Have you bought more land?" Vincent sighed, looking uncomfortable. "I was going to tell you tonight. Jenkins came to me last month offering to sell. His wife wants to move back east to be near their daughter. It was too good an opportunity to pass up. The land has good water access and adjoins our east pasture." "I'm not upset about the land," Abigail clarified. "I'm just curious why you didn't mention it." "Honestly, I wanted it to be a surprise," Vincent admitted. "I thought of it as a gift for you and Rose, securing our future, expanding what we can leave to our daughter. The deal was only finalized today." Abigail's heart softened at his explanation. "That's a wonderful gift, Vincent. But you don't need to surprise me with land purchases. We're partners in this life we're building." He reached over to take her gloved hand, his expression earnest. "You're right. No more secrets, even well-intentioned ones." He hesitated, then added, "Hammond's behavior today concerns me." There was something threatening in his tone. "He's just a bitter man with too much time on his hands," Abigail said, though she wasn't entirely convinced of her own assessment anymore. "Perhaps," Vincent conceded, "but I want you to promise me something. Don't go into town alone for a while. If Hammond's obsession with you is growing, I don't want to take any chances." Abigail looked down at Rose, sleeping peacefully despite the confrontation they'd just experienced. The thought of anything threatening her family made her blood run cold. "I promise," she agreed. The incident in town cast a shadow over the next few weeks. Vincent seemed more vigilant, checking the property more frequently and instructing the ranch hands to report any strangers in the area. Abigail found herself startling at unexpected sounds and keeping Rose even closer than usual. But as February gave way to March with no further trouble, they gradually relaxed. Spring was approaching, bringing with it new calves, preparations for planting, and Rose's increasing mobility as she learned to roll over and sit up with support. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Rose playing on a blanket at their feet, Vincent brought up a subject they had both been avoiding. "I've been thinking about Hammond," he began cautiously. Abigail looked up from her sewing. "What about him? His fixation on you seems personal somehow, as if he has some grudge beyond mere dislike." Vincent ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Abigail had come to recognize as a sign of his frustration. "I can't help wondering if there's something more to it that we're missing." Abigail set aside her work, considering this. "What more could there be? I'd never met him before coming to Redemption." "That's just it," Vincent said, leaning forward. "What if you had? Or what if he's connected to your past in some way we don't know about?" The suggestion sent a chill through Abigail. "How could that be possible?" "I don't know," Vincent admitted. "But his behavior goes beyond typical small-town gossip or dislike. It's as if he's waiting for something." Before Abigail could respond, a noise from outside caught their attention, the sound of approaching horses. Vincent rose, moving to the window with a caution that spoke of his years on the frontier. "Were you expecting anyone?" Abigail asked, gathering Rose into her arms. Vincent shook his head, his expression tense. "No, and it's too late for casual visitors." He moved to the gun cabinet, removing his rifle and checking that it was loaded. "Take Rose upstairs," he instructed quietly. "Stay there until I call for you." Abigail wanted to protest, to stay by his side, but the protective instinct for her child overrode all other concerns. She hurried upstairs with Rose, her heart pounding, and went to the bedroom window that overlooked the front of the house. From her vantage point, she could see 3 riders approaching, and with a jolt of alarm, she recognized George Hammond in the lead. The other 2 men were strangers to her, rough-looking types who seemed out of place with the well-dressed banker. She heard the front door open below, then Vincent's voice, firm but controlled. "Hammond, what brings you out here at this hour?" "Just a friendly visit, Vaughn," Hammond's voice replied, its usual false pleasantness on full display. "I wanted to discuss a business proposition with you." "Any business can wait until morning at the bank," Vincent responded. "Now is not the time for social calls." There was a pause, then Hammond's voice again, all pretense of friendliness gone. "I'm afraid this can't wait. May we come in?" "No," Vincent said flatly. "State your business from where you stand or leave my property." Abigail held Rose closer, the baby sensing her tension and beginning to fuss. She whispered soothing words, straining to hear the conversation below. "Very well," Hammond's voice came again, harder now. "I'll be direct. The Jenkins property you purchased, there's been a complication. The deed was improperly filed. It legally reverts to the bank." "That's impossible," Vincent countered. "I have the deed properly signed and witnessed." "Witnesses can be mistaken," Hammond said smoothly. "Documents can be lost. But I'm a reasonable man. I'm prepared to offer you a solution." "I'm listening," Vincent replied, his tone wary. "The property can still be yours, but at a higher price. Say, double what you've already paid." Abigail gasped softly. It was extortion, pure and simple. The land purchase had already stretched their finances to the limit. "That's robbery, Hammond, and you know it," Vincent said, anger evident in his voice. "The deal was fair and legal. If you have concerns about the documentation, we can discuss it with Judge Parker tomorrow." "I don't think you understand your position, Vaughn," Hammond replied, his voice dropping to a menacing register that Abigail could barely hear. "This isn't a negotiation. Either you pay or things could become uncomfortable for you and your family." There was a tense silence, then the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked. "Get off my property," Vincent said, his voice deadly quiet. "Now, and if you ever threaten my family again, Hammond, it will be the last thing you do." "You're making a mistake," Hammond warned. "A terrible mistake." "The only mistake was thinking you were someone worth doing business with," Vincent replied. "Now go, all of you." Abigail heard the shuffle of movement, then the sound of horses being turned around. From her window, she watched the 3 men ride away, Hammond's posture rigid with fury. When they had disappeared down the road, she hurried downstairs with Rose, finding Vincent standing in the doorway, rifle still in hand, his expression grim. "Vincent, what was that about?" she asked, though she had heard enough to understand the basics. He turned to her, his face softening at the sight of her and Rose. "Hammond's trying to extort more money for the Jenkins property. Claims there's something wrong with the deed." He set the rifle aside, running a hand over his face. "It's nonsense, of course. The documents are in order. He's just trying to squeeze more money out of us." "But why? He's the bank manager, not the owner. How does this benefit him?" Vincent shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe he gets a percentage of profits, maybe he's in financial trouble himself, or maybe—" He paused, looking troubled. "Maybe this is his way of getting back at us, at you, for some perceived slight." Abigail sat down heavily, still holding Rose close. "What do we do now?" "First thing tomorrow, I'll ride to the county seat and speak with Judge Parker. He witnessed the sale. He'll confirm everything was proper." Vincent came to sit beside her, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. "Don't worry, Abigail. Hammond's bluffing. He has no legal ground to stand on." But as they prepared for bed that night, neither could shake the feeling that Hammond's visit was only the beginning of their troubles. The next morning, Vincent prepared to ride to the county seat, 30 miles away. "I should be back by tomorrow evening," he told Abigail as he saddled his horse. "Hank and Joe will be around all day, and the new hand, Tom, will be staying in the bunkhouse overnight. If there's any trouble, any at all, fire 3 shots in the air. They'll come running." Abigail nodded, Rose on her hip. "We'll be fine, Vincent. Go set this straight with the judge." He kissed her goodbye, then bent to kiss Rose's forehead. "Lock the doors," he reminded her. "And keep the rifle where you can reach it." "I will," she promised. "Be safe." She watched him ride away, then went back inside, securing the door as instructed. The day passed quietly enough. She did her usual chores, played with Rose, and prepared meals for herself and the hands. But an undercurrent of anxiety ran through everything, making her start at every unexpected sound. That evening, after putting Rose to bed, Abigail sat by the fire with a book, though she found herself reading the same page repeatedly without absorbing any of it. The wind had picked up, rattling the windows and creating eerie whistling sounds around the eaves of the house. A sudden knock at the door made her heart leap into her throat. Setting aside her book, she moved cautiously to the window, peering out. In the dim light from the porch lantern, she could make out Tom, the new ranch hand, looking anxious, relieved but still cautious. Abigail retrieved the rifle before opening the door slightly. "Tom, is everything all right? Begging your pardon, Mrs. Vaughn," the young man said, tugging at his hat nervously. "But there's something wrong with one of the horses in the barn. Looks like colic. I tried to handle it myself, but—" Abigail hesitated. Vincent had been teaching her about horse ailments, knowing she might need to handle such situations in his absence. Colic could be serious, potentially fatal if not treated quickly. "Let me check on the baby," she said. "I'll be right out." Rose was sleeping soundly in her crib. Abigail tucked the blankets more securely around her, then retrieved her coat and the rifle. She considered her options: wake Rose and bring her to the barn, or leave her sleeping and hurry back as quickly as possible. The barn was only 100 yards from the house, and she would be with Tom. Rose would likely sleep through the night, undisturbed. Decision made, Abigail left a lamp burning low in the bedroom and hurried downstairs. "Lead the way," she told Tom, keeping the rifle ready as Vincent had taught her. They crossed the yard to the barn, the wind whipping at their clothing. Inside, the familiar smells of hay and horses greeted them, but Abigail immediately sensed something was wrong. The horses seemed unusually agitated, shifting nervously in their stalls. "Which one is it?" she asked, looking around. "The bay in the back," Tom replied, walking ahead of her. Abigail followed, rifle still in hand, her senses on high alert. When they reached the last stall, she was puzzled to find the bay standing calmly, showing no signs of distress. "I don't see," she began, turning to Tom, but Tom wasn't looking at the horse. He was looking past her, his expression apologetic and somewhat fearful. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Vaughn," he mumbled. "He said he'd hurt my family if I didn't help." Before Abigail could react, a cloth was pressed over her mouth and nose from behind. She struggled, trying to bring the rifle to bear, but her assailant was too strong. The sickly sweet smell of chloroform filled her nostrils, and darkness began to close in around the edges of her vision. Her last conscious thought was of Rose, alone in the house, before the blackness claimed her completely. When Abigail regained consciousness, her first sensation was of motion, the swaying, jolting movement of a wagon. Her head throbbed, her mouth was dry, and her wrists were bound in front of her. She was lying on a hard wooden surface covered with a rough blanket. Panic surged through her as memory returned. "Rose," she gasped, struggling to sit up. "Your brat is fine," came a cold voice from the front of the wagon. "For now, George Hammond." Abigail squinted in the darkness, making out his silhouette against the night sky as he drove the wagon. Beside him sat one of the men who had accompanied him to the ranch the previous night. "What have you done?" Abigail demanded, her voice hoarse. "Where is my daughter?" "As I said, she's fine," Hammond replied without turning. "One of my associates is watching her. Whether she remains fine depends entirely on your husband's cooperation." Cold fear gripped Abigail's heart. "If you harm one hair on her head, save your threats, Mrs. Vaughn," Hammond interrupted. "You're hardly in a position to make demands." Abigail forced herself to think clearly despite her terror and the lingering effects of the chloroform. "What do you want? Is this about the Jenkins property?" Hammond laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "The property? That was just a convenient pretext. No, this is about something far more personal." "I don't understand," Abigail said, trying to loosen her bonds discreetly. "I never did anything to you." "Not to me specifically," Hammond conceded, "but to my brother, that's another matter entirely." Confusion joined Abigail's fear. "Your brother? I don't even know your brother." Hammond finally turned to look at her, his face ghostly in the moonlight. "Perhaps not by name, but you certainly met him. He led the band of bandits that attacked your family's wagon train. The same bandits your testimony helped identify to the territorial marshals." Abigail gasped as the pieces fell into place. After the attack that had killed her parents, she had indeed given a description of the men to a marshal who found her wandering. She had been too traumatized to recall much, but she had remembered one man clearly, a tall figure with a distinctive scar who had seemed to be leading the others. "He was hung 2 months ago," Hammond continued, his voice tight with barely controlled rage, "while I was forced to watch. My own brother, executed like a common criminal." "He was a criminal," Abigail shot back, anger momentarily overriding her fear. "He murdered innocent people, including my parents," Hammond shrugged, turning back to the road. "He took what he wanted. That's the way of the West, whether people like to admit it or not. The strong survive, the weak perish. My brother was strong, until you helped bring him down." "So this is revenge," Abigail said, understanding at last. "You discovered I was in redemption and saw an opportunity." "Imagine my surprise when you showed up on that auction block," Hammond confirmed. "I almost bid for you myself, just for the pleasure of making you suffer. But then Vaughn stepped in with his noble gesture, and I realized there was a better way, a slower way. Watching you build a life, start to feel safe and happy, knowing all along that I would take it all away." The coldness of his plan, the calculated cruelty, made Abigail's blood run cold. "Vincent will find us," she said with more confidence than she felt. "And when he does—" "Oh, I'm counting on him finding us," Hammond replied, an edge of anticipation in his voice. "That's the whole point. He'll come for you, and when he does, he'll have a choice to make his wife or his child. Either way, he loses someone he loves, just as I lost my brother." Abigail fell silent, horror washing over her as she understood the full scope of Hammond's revenge. Whatever happened, he intended to destroy her family. They traveled through the night, the wagon jolting over rough terrain. Abigail tried to keep track of their direction, but in the darkness, with her head still foggy from the chloroform, it was impossible to be certain. They seemed to be heading into the mountains, away from settled areas. By dawn, They had reached a small cabin in a remote valley. Hammond and his companion forced Abigail inside, where a third man waited the other rider from their visit to the ranch. "Any problems?" Hammond asked him. "None," the man replied. "No sign of Vaughn yet. The new hand is keeping an eye on things at the ranch as instructed. Tom." Abigail's heart sank at the confirmation of his betrayal, though Hammond's threat against his family offered some explanation, if not excuse. "Excellent," Hammond said, removing his coat. "Tie her to that chair. When our guest of honor arrives, we'll be ready for him." As the men secured her to a heavy wooden chair, Abigail looked around, assessing her surroundings. The cabin was small and sparsely furnished: a table, a few chairs, a wood stove, and a narrow cot in one corner. There were 2 windows, both small, and the single door through which they had entered. No obvious means of escape, especially while bound. "My daughter," she said when they had finished tying her. "You said someone was watching her. Who? Where is she?" Hammond considered her for a moment, then shrugged. "No harm in telling you, I suppose. She's still at your ranch with my associate. Comfortable enough for now. If Vaughn cooperates, she'll remain that way." Abigail tried to take comfort in knowing Rose was still at home, but the thought of her baby in the hands of Hammond's men was agonizing. "What do you mean by cooperates?" she asked. "That's between me and your husband," Hammond replied dismissively. He turned to his men. "One of you keep watch outside. The other stay in here with our guest. I need to rest before the main event." He moved to the cot, stretching out with apparent unconcern, while one man went outside and the other took a seat at the table, cleaning a revolver with practiced movements. Left alone with her thoughts, Abigail cycled between terror, anger, and desperate planning. Vincent would return from the county seat to find her gone and Rose in danger. He would come looking for her. Hammond was counting on it. But what then? What cruel choice was Hammond planning to force upon him? And more immediately, how could she escape? The ropes binding her to the chair were tight, cutting into her wrists and ankles. The guard watched her constantly, his hand never far from his weapon. Hours passed with excruciating slowness. Hammond woke around midday, and his men prepared a simple meal. They offered Abigail water but no food, and only untied one hand so she could drink. "You won't get away with this," she told Hammond as he ate. "Even if you manage to hurt Vincent or me, people will come looking. The law will find you." Hammond smiled coldly. "By the time anyone realizes what's happened, I'll be long gone. I've made arrangements, a new identity, a new life far from here. This isn't just revenge, Mrs. Vaughn, it's justice." "Murdering innocent people isn't justice," Abigail countered. "It's madness." Something flickered in Hammond's eyes, a momentary glimpse of the instability beneath his controlled exterior. "Perhaps," he conceded, "but it's a madness born of loss. You should understand that better than most." Before Abigail could respond, the guard by the window tensed. "Rider coming," he announced. "Looks like Vaughn." Hammond's face lit with anticipation. "Right on schedule, get ready." Cold dread washed over Abigail. Vincent had found them just as Hammond had planned. Now the trap would spring shut. "Vincent," she shouted, desperate to warn him. "It's a trap." The guard backhanded her across the face, splitting her lip. "Quiet," he growled. Hammond moved to the window, watching as Vincent approached. "Perfect," he murmured. "Johnson, get behind the door. Mills, keep your gun on her." The cabin fell silent as they waited, the only sound Abigail's ragged breathing as she tasted blood from her cut lip. Then came the creak of footsteps on the porch, followed by a cautious knock. "Hammond," Vincent's voice called, controlled but tight with anger. "I know you're in there. I want to talk." "The door's open, Vaughn," Hammond replied, standing to the side, out of the direct line of fire should Vincent enter shooting. "We've been expecting you." The door opened slowly and Vincent stepped inside, his gun drawn. His eyes immediately found Abigail, widening at the sight of the blood on her face. Before he could move toward her, Johnson closed the door behind him and pressed a gun to the back of his head. "Drop the weapon, Vaughn," Hammond ordered, "or Mills puts a bullet in your wife's pretty head." Vincent hesitated only a moment before letting his gun fall to the floor. "Let her go, Hammond," he said, his voice deadly calm. "This is between you and me." "On the contrary," Hammond replied, gesturing for Johnson to disarm Vincent completely. "It's very much about Mrs. Vaughn. She's the reason we're all here, after all." Vincent's eyes narrowed in confusion, then widened in realization. "The bandit leader they hanged 2 months ago. He was your brother." Hammond inclined his head, impressed. "Very good. How did you figure it out?" "I spoke with Judge Parker yesterday. He mentioned the execution, said the man's brother was a banker somewhere in the territory. When I described you, he confirmed it was the same family." Vincent's gaze never left Abigail as he spoke. "Are you hurt?" he asked her. "Just the lip," she assured him, relief at seeing him alive, warring with terror at their situation. "Rose is at the ranch," Vincent confirmed grimly, "with one of Hammond's men. I saw him through the window before I left. He has her in the main house." Hammond clapped his hands together. "Excellent. Now we're all on the same page. Yes, your precious daughter is under my associate's care. He has very specific instructions, dependent on the outcome of our meeting here." "What do you want, Hammond?" Vincent demanded, fists clenched at his sides. "Justice," Hammond replied simply. "An eye for an eye. My brother's life for the life of someone you love." He paused, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "But I'm not entirely without mercy. I'm going to let you choose which one dies, your wife or your child." Horror washed over Vincent's face, matched by the silent scream building in Abigail's throat. "You're insane," he whispered. "Perhaps," Hammond acknowledged. "Grief can do that to a man, as I'm sure you'll discover shortly. Now choose. One lives, one dies. If you refuse to choose, they both die. You have 1 minute." Abigail's mind raced frantically. There had to be a way out of this nightmare, some solution that didn't end with either her death or her daughter's. Vincent seemed similarly desperate, his eyes darting around the cabin, assessing, planning. "Time's running out, Vaughn," Hammond prompted, checking his pocket watch. 30 seconds. Vincent took a deep breath, his shoulders squaring as he came to a decision. "If someone has to die today," he said quietly, "let it be me." Hammond frowned. "That's not one of the options." "It's the only option I'll accept," Vincent replied firmly. "My life for theirs. Both of them go free, unharmed, and you can do whatever you want to me." "Vincent, no," Abigail cried, straining against her bonds. Hammond considered the offer, clearly intrigued by this unexpected turn. "Your life for theirs," he repeated thoughtfully. "An interesting proposition, but how do I know your death would cause you sufficient suffering? The point is for you to live with the pain of loss, as I have had to do." "Then let me make another suggestion," Vincent said, his voice steady despite the desperate situation. "Let Abigail and Rose go. Keep me as your hostage. If they're not safely back at the ranch by nightfall, kill me. If they are, you and I finish this man to man. No guns, no tricks, just us." Hammond's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You're challenging me to a fight, to the death." "If that's what you want," Vincent confirmed. "I'm offering you the chance for personal revenge, Hammond, not this cowardly targeting of women and children." It was a calculated insult, designed to appeal to Hammond's pride and distract from his original plan. For a long moment, the banker stood silent, weighing the offer. "An interesting proposition," he said finally, "but I think not. I prefer my original plan." He turned to his men. "Johnson, go to the ranch. Tell Peters it's time. Bring the child here." "No." Abigail screamed, renewing her struggles against the ropes. "Please, not Rose." Vincent lunged toward Hammond, but Mills was faster, slamming the butt of his gun into Vincent's temple. He crumpled to the floor, dazed but not unconscious. "Restrain him," Hammond ordered, and Mills quickly bound Vincent's hands behind his back, then hauled him to a chair opposite Abigail's. As Johnson left to fetch Rose, a terrible calm settled over Abigail. She looked at Vincent, his face bloodied now from the blow, his eyes filled with the same desperate love and fear that coursed through her. "Hammond," she said quietly, drawing the banker's attention, "before you do this, there's something you should know." "And what might that be, Mrs. Vaughn?" he asked, amused by her apparent composure. "Your brother," she continued, keeping her voice steady, "he wasn't just a bandit. Before he killed my parents, She paused, swallowing hard. "He assaulted me. Did things no woman should have to endure." Vincent's expression tightened with rage and pain, while Hammond's grew skeptical. "You never mentioned this to the marshals. It wasn't in your testimony." "Would you have spoken of such things to strange men?" Abigail asked, holding his gaze. "I was barely 20, alone and terrified. I told them what I could bear to tell them." Doubt flickered across Hammond's face, just as Abigail had hoped. She was lying. The bandits had killed her parents and taken their possessions, but had left her physically unharmed, perhaps assuming she would die alone in the wilderness. But Hammond couldn't know that, and the seed of doubt might be enough to disrupt his carefully laid plans. "Even if that were true," Hammond said slowly, "it doesn't change anything. My brother paid for his crimes with his life. Now someone will pay for taking him from me." But Abigail could see the hesitation in his eyes. His righteous certainty had been shaken, if only slightly. She pressed her advantage. "If you do this, if you harm an innocent child, you're worse than your brother ever was. At least he killed quickly. What you're planning is torture, not justice." Hammond turned away, visibly disturbed by her words. Vincent, still dazed from the blow to his head, managed to catch Abigail's eye. Something passed between them, a silent communication born of months of growing love and trust. He nodded slightly, then slumped in his chair, appearing more affected by the head wound than he actually was. When Mills turned to check on him, Vincent suddenly kicked out with both legs, catching the man in the knees. Mills went down with a cry of pain, his gun clattering across the floor. Hammond whirled around, drawing his own weapon, but Abigail had been working at her bonds throughout her conversation with him. The ropes had loosened just enough for her to free one hand. She threw herself sideways, chair and all, crashing into Hammond's legs as he aimed at Vincent. The gun discharged, the bullet splintering the cabin wall. Vincent, still bound to his chair, had managed to get to his feet. He charged at Hammond, driving the man back against the wall with enough force to knock the wind from him. Mills was struggling to rise, reaching for his fallen gun. Abigail, still partially bound to the overturned chair, lunged for it first. Her fingers closed around the handle, and without hesitation, she fired. Mills fell back, clutching his shoulder where the bullet had struck. Vincent and Hammond were still grappling, both bound but fighting with desperate intensity. Hammond managed to bring his gun up again, aiming it at Vincent's head. "No!" Abigail screamed, firing Mills's gun a second time. The sound was deafening in the small cabin. Hammond stiffened, a look of surprise crossing his face. Then he slid down the wall, leaving a crimson streak behind him. The bullet had caught him in the chest, and from the amount of blood spreading across his shirt, Abigail knew it was a mortal wound. "Abigail," Vincent gasped, falling to his knees beside Hammond's crumpled form. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she assured him, still struggling with the ropes that bound her to the chair. "Check if he's—" But there was no need. George Hammond was dead, his eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling, his quest for revenge ended by the very woman he had sought to destroy. Mills was still alive, moaning in pain from his shoulder wound. Vincent, after confirming Hammond was beyond help, managed to work his way over to where Abigail was still trying to free herself from the chair. "Turn around," she instructed. "Let me untie your hands first." With some maneuvering, she was able to reach the knots binding his wrists. Once freed, Vincent quickly untied the remaining ropes holding her to the chair. "We need to get to the ranch," he said urgently as they both stood. "Johnson is on his way there now." "Rose, I know," Abigail interrupted, already moving toward the door. "Mills's horse should be outside." "Hammond's too." They secured Mills with his own ropes, then hurried outside. 2 horses were indeed tethered nearby. Mounting quickly, they set off toward the ranch at a gallop, both driven by the same frantic fear for their daughter. The ride seemed endless, though in reality it took less than an hour. As they approached the ranch, Vincent signaled for Abigail to slow down. "Johnson might already be here," he warned. "We need to be careful." They approached cautiously, leaving the horses a short distance away and proceeding on foot. The ranch seemed unusually quiet, no sign of the hands, no activity around the barn or corrals. "Something's wrong," Vincent murmured. "Stay close." They moved toward the main house, using outbuildings for cover. When they reached the porch, Vincent motioned for Abigail to wait while he peered through a window. "I see Peter's Hammond's man," he whispered when he returned to her side. "He's in the living room with Rose. She appears unharmed." No sign of Johnson yet. Relief flooded through Abigail at the news that Rose was all right, quickly followed by renewed determination. "What's the plan?" Vincent considered their options. "I'll go in the back way through the kitchen. You stay here. When you hear me confront Peters, that's your cue to come in through the front door. We'll trap him between us." Abigail nodded, tightening her grip on Mills's gun, which she had kept. "Be careful." "Always," Vincent promised, kissing her quickly before moving toward the back of the house. Abigail waited, counting seconds in her head, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might alert Peters to her presence. Then she heard Vincent's voice from inside, commanding and clear. "Put her down, Peters, slowly." That was her signal. Abigail burst through the front door, gun raised. Peters stood in the middle of the living room, holding Rose. The baby, remarkably, was calm, apparently unaware of the danger. Peters's eyes darted between Vincent, who had entered from the kitchen with Hammond's gun, and Abigail at the front door. "Where's Hammond?" he demanded. "Dead," Vincent replied flatly. "It's over. Put my daughter down." Indecision warred on Peters's face. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. "I was just hired muscle," he said, carefully placing Rose in her cradle. "Hammond's vendetta wasn't my fight." Abigail rushed to the cradle, checking Rose for any signs of harm while keeping her gun trained on Peters. The baby seemed perfectly fine, smiling up at her mother as if nothing unusual had happened. "Where are my ranch hands?" Vincent asked, not lowering his weapon. "Locked in the bunkhouse," Peters replied. "They're unharmed. The new one Tom he helped us, but only because Hammond threatened his family. Kid was terrified." Vincent nodded grimly. "Sit down in that chair, hands where I can see them." Peters complied, and Vincent quickly secured him with rope from the kitchen. "Johnson is on his way here," Vincent told him. "What are his orders?" "To bring the baby to the cabin," Peters admitted. "Hammond wanted you to watch your child die before he killed your wife and then you." Abigail shuddered, holding Rose protectively closer. "When is Johnson expected?" "Soon," Peters said. "He left the cabin not long after you two escaped." Vincent moved to the window, scanning the approach to the ranch. "We'll be ready for him." They didn't have to wait long. Within half an hour, they spotted Johnson riding toward the house. Vincent positioned himself by the front door, while Abigail stayed in the living room with Rose and the restrained Peters. When Johnson entered, calling for Peters, Vincent was waiting. The ensuing struggle was brief. Johnson, unprepared for resistance, was quickly overpowered and disarmed. With both of Hammond's remaining men secured, Vincent went to free his ranch hands. They were shocked and angry at what had transpired, particularly at Tom's involvement, but understanding when Vincent explained the coercion behind it. "What now, boss?" Hank asked when they had all gathered in the main house, Johnson and Peters tied securely to chairs. "Now we take these two to the sheriff in the county seat," Vincent replied. "They'll face justice for their part in kidnapping and conspiracy to murder." "And Tom?" Joe asked, glancing at the young hand who stood apart from the others, shame evident on his face. Vincent considered the question. "Tom was coerced. He'll have to answer to the law as well, but I'll speak on his behalf. Hammond threatened his family. Most men would have done the same in his position." Tom looked up, gratitude and remorse mingling in his expression. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vaughn, Mrs. Vaughn. I never wanted anyone to get hurt." "We understand," Abigail said gently, surprising everyone with her forgiveness. "Fear for those we love can drive us to desperate actions." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Vincent and two of the hands escorted Johnson, Peters, and a repentant Tom to the county seat, where the sheriff took them into custody. Tom was released after questioning, his cooperation and the circumstances of his involvement taken into account. Judge Parker, already familiar with Hammond's brother's case, was appalled at the banker's revenge plot. He assured Vincent that Abigail would face no charges for Hammond's death, as it was clearly self-defense. When Vincent returned to the ranch, he found Abigail and Rose waiting for him on the porch. The sight of them, safe and sound in the golden light of sunset, filled him with such profound gratitude that for a moment he couldn't speak. Abigail rose to meet him as he dismounted, Rose balanced on her hip. "Welcome home," she said softly, reaching up to touch his face. "It's really over now." Vincent gathered them both in his arms, holding them as if he might never let go. "It's over," he agreed, "and we're all safe. That's what matters." That night, after Rose was asleep, Vincent and Abigail sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the vast Colorado sky. They had been through so much in the short time they had known each other, from their first meeting at the auction to building a life together, from the joy of Rose's birth to the terror of Hammond's revenge. Yet somehow they had emerged stronger, their bond deepened by the trials they had faced together. "I've been thinking," Vincent said, his arm around Abigail's shoulders, "about what Hammond said about leaving, starting a new life somewhere else." Abigail looked up at him, concerned. "You want to leave the ranch?" "No," he said quickly. "This is our home, but I was thinking we might take a trip, when Rose is a bit older, see some of the country together, maybe even visit the coast." Relief washed over Abigail's face, followed by excitement at the prospect. "I'd like that." "I've never seen the ocean." "Neither have I," Vincent admitted. "We could discover it together." Abigail leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment settling over her like a warm blanket. "I never imagined that day in redemption that life could turn out this way, that I could be so happy." Vincent pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "When I said not anymore that day, I meant it. You weren't alone then, and you never will be again. I promise you that, Abigail Vaughn." "I know," she whispered, lifting her face to his for a kiss that held all the love, gratitude, and hope that filled her heart. "And neither will you." As they sat together under the star-filled sky, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the auction block where she had stood alone and afraid, to the safety and love she had found with Vincent. From the tragedy that had claimed her parents, to the new family she had built. From despair to hope, from solitude to belonging. She had once been auctioned because she was alone, until a cowboy had stepped forward and said, "Not anymore." And in those two simple words, Vincent Vaughn had changed her life forever. Now, cradled in his arms with their daughter sleeping peacefully inside, Abigail knew with absolute certainty that she would never be alone again. Whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together as a family, bound by a love that had been forged in adversity and would endure for a lifetime.